His House is a British psychological horror movie. It's essentially a haunted house film, which centres on an African refugee couple who are granted asylum after fleeing war-torn South Sudan. However, one of the conditions is they must remain in the housing chosen for them, otherwise their case could be disqualified and they are sent back. As they struggle to adapt to their new life, it's not long before they are haunted not only by their past, but also malevolent spirits coming from the walls of a house they cannot leave. This is such a great premise because it instantly gives our protagonists an absolutely ironclad reason to stay exactly where they are and deal with the monsters. Literally the lesser of two evils. The couple are called Bol and Rial. Along their journey across the English Channel to the UK, their boat unfortunately crashes. Their daughter, Niagak, as well as many others, drown at sea. It's implied in their interview with the immigration officers that part of the reason their application is approved is because they pity the couple for losing their child. You can hear them reference it to each other. They are granted asylum and given a weekly allowance of £74, but are strictly prohibited from working or supplementing their income in any way. They are also given a house chosen for them and are crucially told, "You must reside at this address. You must not move from this address." As they aren't technically citizens yet and are essentially in probation, I think the film does a lot to present the image of them not being far off of prisoners.
Congratulations. You're being released as asylum seekers, not as citizens, not yet.
There's a great use of colour and lack thereof to convey these ideas. Whenever it cuts back to Africa, the colours are inviting, bright and vibrant, showing warmth and community. But also on the flip side, incredible danger and destruction. By contrast, scenes in the UK typically have a widespread use of blues and greys, lots of clinical looking fluorescent lighting and dirty looking pastels, which makes everyone look sick or pallid. This all comes together to really paint the image of a UK council estate as dull, cold, dirty and depressing. Not far off reality. Even the bus they get on literally looks like something which would transport you to or from a prison. But ultimately, it's safe. Compared to the violence they just escaped, it's somewhere they can start again and build their own home. We're never told exactly where it is, but from how decrepit it is, I'd say it's probably somewhere like Chatham or Peterborough, maybe Croydon. His House is a fantastic debut film for director-screenwriter Remy Weeks. Drawing on many themes and ideas including isolation versus community, deceit and resentment, survivors' guilt and PTSD, feeling completely out of place and disorientated in a foreign country, assimilating to British culture versus retaining your own cultural pride and individual sense of identity, and finally, the awful things that some people are willing and arguably may have to do in the name of survival. Remy blends all of these elements together in a subtle way that's not trying to ram it down your throat, more posing a question or leaving it up for you to interpret. Later on in the film, as more supernatural folklore elements are introduced, both characters being in a form of denial is used against them. This leads to ever-building tensions between the couple as they start to distrust each other. You can easily take away a lot of the creepy supernatural elements and the story could still work as a claustrophobic thriller, slowly dialing up the intensity in the levels of paranoia and the feeling that you or the person that you love might be losing their mind.
I have looked into your eyes. You're a liar.
This is an independent movie made on a fairly small budget. Bob Weinstein from the Weinstein Company, obviously, tried to sue the creators for $10 million after they declined to have their company involved, as he said that there had been a verbal agreement.
Alrighty then.
Luckily for the creators of His House, the #MeToo movement then happened, so old Bobby and Harves decided they had bigger problems to deal with and dropped the case. This all meant that the film's release was delayed by a few years, which ironically led to it coming out in either the best or the worst possible year for a Netflix movie all about being stuck in a house. 2020.
You must stay at home.
I remember watching this when it came out and relating to it on a level I just don't think that I could have pre-pandemic. But it didn't really do well commercially, and this could be because it maybe struck a bit too close to home for some people at the time. Or they just hadn't heard of it. I feel like it's flown under a lot of people's radars. It feels like the characters are always being watched, both in and outside of the house. You can see that literally from neighbours or ghosts, but also the setup of council estates is an absolute breeding ground for paranoia. There's so many bloody windows on you. Bole and Rial even take part in this by appearing out to look at an old woman, joking that it's the Queen and asking where's Charles. Let's face it, spying on the neighbours is British as fuck, so this checks out. When it comes to race relations in this movie, there's many ways that you can interpret things, and I suppose a large part of what you may or may not take from it would depend on your own personal experiences. Bole and Rial do encounter overt racism and prejudice from many people who view them with suspicion or as though they don't belong here, or even deserve the dilapidated home they've been provided with. And if you really wanted, you can also take the view of there being unintentional moments of alienation from people who may not have ill intentions, but the end result can still be felt as a form of racism. Similar vibes to the first time I watched Get Out, is the best way I can put it. As well as this, discrimination in the UK is complicated. I feel like generally in today's culture, you're way more likely to be targeted for your perceived status in the social hierarchy, i.e. being foreign or of a low class. For example, there's a lot of prejudice against white European immigrants, like from Romania, Poland, Lithuania, France.
Messieurs.
Something I really appreciate is that this film so easily could have been a social justice piece about how terrible the white British public are, and we all need to do better in saving the poor, innocent refugees. Don't get me wrong, this film is definitely sympathetic to the plight of asylum seekers, but it doesn't feel like the narrative is preaching to me in a mean-spirited way that it easily could have. The story is more complicated than that. Our main characters are not perfect. They're flawed people who have done bad things. A recurring expression that comes up is that they are good people. And I believe ultimately they are. Or at least that they're trying to be. But this movie makes you question what exactly makes someone a good person, particularly someone who is coming from such a traumatic experience. There are some conveniences towards the end of the movie, which I will go into further after the spoiler warning. But it didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the film. With compelling themes, fantastic performances, creative visuals, and use of practical effects, I think His House is a solid independent horror movie which is well worth your time. And with a runtime of only about an hour and a half, it doesn't outstay its welcome. It knows what it wants to say and it gets straight to it. So that's the end of the spoiler-free part of the review. If you haven't seen the film yet, please do go and watch it and come back to watch the rest of this video. If you don't care about spoilers, please know that you're wrong, but that's your choice. Rial tells Bole the story of an honourable but poor man who, in trying to build something for himself, stole from the people around him. But one day he steals from a night witch, also known as an Apeth. The witch followed him, whispered through the walls, and basically drove him to insanity. This is the entity which has followed and torments Bole and Rial through haunting apparitions. There's several ways that you can interpret the Apeth, potentially as some sort of vigilante character, but I think it's a highly manipulative monster who is a metaphor for the issues facing our main characters. It feeds off of grief and anguish, and if you let it in, it will completely consume you. There's a sequence in which Rial leaves the house to see a doctor, and along the way gets lost in a maze of council housing. Side note, I loved this part when she keeps running into the same little boy, kicking a ball against the wall. It reminded me of in The Shining when Danny is driving about in his tricycle through the Overlook Hotel. Just a strong feeling of deja vu and like something is off. I later found out that the director is a big Stanley Kubrick fan, so I wouldn't be surprised if he was actually inspired by this. She sees a group of black teenage boys and asks them for directions. They mock her, somewhat sassily at first, by providing her with conflicting directions, and then outright make fun of her accent, racially taunt her, and even say she should go back to Africa. I think this was really smart to have it come from other black people, as it shows them othering themselves from her. Rial sees people who look like her, and thinks that they will be accepting, but they only see it as that they are British, and she is not. Therefore, they are of a superior class to her, even though ironically they're all stuck in the same squalid council estate, but whatever. In contrast, Bole is embraced in a predominantly white British pub scene, as he tries to fit in by singing along with football songs about Peter Crouch, drinking tea and munching on digestives. You get the sense that he is still other and apart from the rest of the group. but that in time he would likely be fully accepted. The obvious spoiler is that Nyagak is not their daughter, and that Bol used her as a prop to get them on the bus out of Dodge and into the UK. To make matters worse, he then lets her drown when the boat crashes. What a dick. I believe the enormity of this atrocity is what attracted the Apeth to cling to them, like it's feeding off of their bad energy. I was devastated by this revelation, especially when you see the real mother futilely chasing after the bus with her daughter on. The sound of her anguished screams were truly horrifying. And it completely changed the tone of so many scenes throughout the movie, knowing that she wasn't theirs. It further explains why Rial seems to be in a state of grieving throughout most of the film, while Bol appears to want to move on from this as soon as possible. I think the Night Witch was harsher on Bol as he was the instigator of the crime and is refusing to see what he's done. Rial is the only one who seemed to show some sort of parental instincts by promising to keep the little girl safe. And when they're all in the ocean, Rial is screaming for Nyagak, but Bol is actively pulling her away. In being so tunnel-visioned on his mission to take himself and his wife to safety, he only sees the little girl as a tool which is no longer needed. While it plays on his conscience by appearing in his dreams, he still has a lot of atoning to do for this. My only real issue with the movie is towards the very end. When you see the final design of the monster and how it's killed off, they're both kind of anticlimactic. The monster was definitely much more interesting and scary when you didn't know what it looked like and was just a creepy pair of glowing eyes and Javier Botet's menacing voice. Once you see it, it just felt like a generic, bold, naked Slenderman kind of guy I've already seen a million times. Also, I don't understand how a supernatural creature is able to be killed off by Rial with what looked like a standard kitchen knife you get from B&M. Maybe it's a special knife with some sort of extra power, as I think it's the same one presented to Rial in her dream by the Apeth, but I don't feel like that's ever fully explained or clarified. However, ultimately, the last scene of the movie is the image that stays with you as a lasting impression. Seeing them standing together in the house in solidarity, facing and surrounded by the ghosts of the other refugees who didn't make it is such a powerful moment, and is notably where the music is a harmonic blend of both Western and African influence. Up until now, a lot of the cinematic score was very disjointed and often sounded to me like screams. I think this is where they have reached their middle ground between adapting to their new life, but still remembering the past and learning to live with the survivor's guilt and trauma, instead of running away or letting it consume them. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments. Please go and watch this movie if you haven't yet, it's a good one. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and maybe subscribe if you want. Cool. Bye.